Hello everyone, welcome to the special edition of Let There Be Light Fireside Chats. As we all know, the electricity sector has evolved with the emergence of the Electricity Act 2023. Different states have been given regulatory control over their electricity market. So, in this special edition, we'll be spotlighting commissioners, coordinators of different states and having interviews with them on how they have been driving these changes. So, you do not want to miss any of the sessions. It promises to be enlightening, so stay tuned.
So let's talk about pitfalls that are common in power project development, common pitfalls that affect power projects bankability and the like.
Now, it's an interesting question. Now, the expertise. So everybody talks about power, light. But you realize that there's what we call knowledge asymmetry. There are information silos. So I know a lot about one thing. And that person knows a lot about another thing. So a generation person can know a lot about generation. A transmission person can know a lot about transmission. A distribution person can know a lot about distribution. Even within distribution, there are those who say, okay, I'm great at managing the feeder line, managing the transformer, or the metering issue, right? And so a lot of education is necessary among Nigerians to know, okay, where is even the problem, so that they can direct attention. Similarly, on a project development perspective, and that's sometimes where we come in. You would find a sponsor with good intention, but not very knowledgeable about the power space. And that can impact the scale in which they want to go around building a power infrastructure or energy infrastructure. And one of the pitfalls is the inability to match demand with supply. So if you are the one who want to do the supply to the sector, how have you calibrated how much demand that you want to supply? So it's like tomatoes or anything. If you fill the market with tomatoes, price goes down, everybody suffers. There has to be an equilibrium, demand matching supply. And you would see in every house and every office in Nigeria, 9 out of 10 times, your generator is bigger than the load that is carrying. Because they don't make generators they make it in 5s or 10s. So it's 40 kV, 30 kV, 20 kV, 25, 50, 100, 320. But it's quite possible in between, that's where your load is, right? Or even less. So critical thing, and that's why, there's a lot of cost in running in some of these generators. So a developer has to measure accurately, do an energy demand study, do a market demand study, and be sure that this is the realizable demand. And these are the people that will pay for my power. And this is the price that they are willing to pay. And as much as possible, I agree upfront. Then you can now come to the financing committee and say, okay, community, I have found a location that needs 5 megawatts of 5.5 or 6. I will start with maybe 3. But here are my plans to grow it to 6 or 10. Now, they've agreed the tariff. One of the challenges with our tariffs is that people sometimes isolate power sector from other parts of their life. Go and buy petrol. If the price goes up, you are not going to argue with the petrol attendant. You will buy the quantity that you want. You will protest if there's a legitimate protest in the streets or something, but just based on that market forces or based on that transaction, you will pay that that price. You go and buy tomatoes, or you go to any of the supermarkets, it's the price that is there, particularly for supermarkets. You cannot price in a supermarket, right? So in power, there's what they call indexation, where you say, look, certain things are going to go up because of the fundamentals and how I raise my money, how the Nigeria is, FX, different things. Or central bank will change its rates, and the banks will have to adjust those rates as well. So you have to index your tariff. That is, over time, for a certain percentage, here's how the price will go up. Some consumers accept that, others don't. So one of the challenges as a developer is, how do you index your tariff so that if there are any issues in the fiscal environment, there are any issues in the market environment, your tariff can cover the costs. Could be the cost of gas, which is indexed and goes up and down, right? Particularly for gas. But for solar, it's once you put the solar, it's there. You're not buying any new supply. You're not buying supply to feed the solar. It might just be your cost of finance, that is changing, or inflation. Inflation, as we know, last year was like 30%, right? So you take money in 2 years ago, that means you might need 20%, 30% extra to be able to get back to value. So who bears that cost, right? These are realities for investors, right? So those are some of the pitfalls: demand, tariff, and then also making sure you put your assets in the best possible place. If it's a gas power plant, you want to be as close as possible to a gas pipeline. If it's CNG is using, then you need to secure your supply chain, because it's a virtual supply chain. Someone is buying the gas somewhere, someone has to truck it to you, and you have to time it when it gets to you. If there's go slow or something, it's a problem, right? Then on the technology side, getting the best EPC and getting the best designs, right? Engineering, procurement, and construction. So the engineering is, how do you engineer the power systems and making sure that they are in equilibrium and work optimally based on the demand, right, that you want to meet. So ensuring that your low voltage side, your medium voltage side, the transformers, the calibration of the turbines, just making sure how you evacuate, all of those things are the engineering, right? And the designs for the electrical component, mechanical component, right? The civil component, right? How you build, where you situate it. All of those designs, you need to try and get the best possible person to do it, so that you can come up with a bill of quantities that makes sense when you're now procuring the materials and you're now constructing it. So getting the great designs, and obviously getting a great engineering company to build it. Not your father, not your mother, not your friend, or church or mosque member, but just going out there and getting the best, are some of the things that don't always happen but are important.
Thank you very much. That's exhaustive. It looks like if you want to come into the market, you have a lot of work to do.
You see, that's the thing, if Kanji Dam was the first power plant in Nigeria, I think it was the first large scale. I think it was Kanji. I think it was built in the 60s. Shiruru, I think, in the 70s. Zungeru was just completed 2-3 years ago. Egbin, I think, was in the 80s when gas was now available. And the Escravos Lagos gas line was now built from Chevron's in Warri axis to Lagos. These things take time. And if all these risks I mentioned, particularly on the policy side, if we always move in the goalpost, if there's no certainty, businesses cannot tolerate uncertainty, right? And we should situate it in our own selves as individuals, right? If every time you want to pay school fees, for example, the school changes the fees, right? It'll be a struggle. or every time you want to go and pay for a crate of egg, it changes. What do you do? So there has to be some certainty around the power sector and clarity. I mean, recently there was a National Integrated Resource Plan that was launched by the Federal Minister of Power, which was great. So it just showed, it was trying to match demand and supply with energy resources around Nigeria, right? Now you now have state electricity markets. They probably have to do the same thing. So if this regulation and plans are cast in stone, so when I come to you, because a power plant can last, for a solar power plant can last for 20 years and is still producing. A gas power plant, you might need to change it over time. Maybe do maintenance, maybe every 5-6 years, or 8 years, you have to change it, change the turbine and all that. But these are things that last for a long time. So if I come in and I sign a 20-year agreement, 5-year agreement, and these are the kind of agreements that are the bedrock of power plants and infrastructure. Either it's a PPP for a transmission line or for a gas line. If the government is not building it and you bring in the private sector, when we look at Africa and generally Nigeria, in proportion of government spend and private sector spend, it's a proportion of 80-20. 80% of financing in Africa comes from the private sector. Only 20%. So the private sector needs to have that certainty. And if the certainty is not there, we will not be able to get the investments that the DISCO needs to make, the GENCO needs to make, or even the government needs to make in order to make sure that we have power, in our homes. Individually, there's self-help, right? And so more and more you see Nigerians putting solar and this sort of thing. But even in that instance, it would be great if there are incentives in place. So in Europe, there's what they call net metering. If I have excess power in my house, I can sell it back to the grid. Yes, and in fact, there's a regulation that I helped work on that actually does that. If you're creative about the how to do it, I interpret it. And what it means is that, those are the sort of incentives where you say, Nigerians, go and build power plants in your house, right? The DISCO is obligated to take it or net off your token or your tariff with what they are getting, right? So these are little ways in which you can actually create a vibrant and everybody can participate in the market.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting. And how are you going to have people participate if they're not aware?
Fair point. There has to be, programs like that you're doing now and programs like this, is one way, is a pathway, and there should be more of this. Like I said, there's knowledge asymmetry. What I know, what you know, is not being widely communicated, and not as much consulted as it should be.
Why do you think there's not much consultation?
You see, again, 50,000 feet. When you look at the pie in Nigeria, the contribution of power on the surface, I'm not talking about the informal contribution, which, cannot be trapped per se, is not a lot. Oil and gas is our biggest contributor to FX. And you would see that there's a strong, vibrant oil and gas community. Yes. Telecoms, for example, with MTN and others, where they ran an auction and, there was certain things in place. A lot of money got into telecoms I know some people became almost, I would say, millionaires from selling recharge cards, right? So it was democratized. And it's we see very successful telecom, certain other sectors like that. Challenge with power is that it's still sort of kept in the corner. It should be front and center of policy. It should be what drives our productivity and even our tax push, our IGR push. It should be power. Because when you have power, it's an enabler of the economy, right? But when it's become so costly, it's taking away purchasing power and increasing the cost of production, and therefore making us even less attractive destination for foreign direct investment, for example. So challenge is that the power sector is looked as being too technical. Is still looked at as being a sort of inferior sector among the other portfolios. And it just so happens that's just the way it is. From privatization, maybe in the past, if we still had NEPA and then government owned it, then it would be such an influential part of government policy. And if and but post privatization, it's mostly in private sector hands, right? But the challenge is that the private sector has not been unleashed. There's still some restraints in the sector. So I think the Electricity Act is supposed to try and do that. The Constitutional Amendment is supposed to try and do that. Band A, Band B is supposed to try and do that. So there's some move to do that. But, I think what Nigerians are saying, it'd be great if it's accelerated and giving some sort of prioritization. What I like to say is that power sector should be like the burning platform. The burning platform metaphor is if you're on an oil rig in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean with the land not in sight, with the depth of ocean at maybe 5 kilometers, right? And the platform, the rig you're on, is on fire. The way you would focus and prioritize what you need to do to put out that fire on that platform will be unprecedented in how you get things done. So if we take that burning platform and say, what, we have no choice. This fire or this power has to be sorted. Otherwise, it's between us and the deep blue sea and the sharks. That's where we need to go. And I think we're gradually getting there. This government, I think, is trying to do that. But it's 36 states, 200 million people, 11 discos, maybe 10, 20 gencos. So it's a lot to coordinate.
Yeah. Speaking of fires, one of our guests described the Electricity Act 2023 in one word, and the word was explosive.
Okay.
Right. So with the emergence of the Act, two questions. How are you advising your clients differently?
Right. So
and the second
Act,
question,
yes.
Sorry. And the second question is, how would you describe the Electricity Act in one word?
It is an interesting piece of legislation. And it does introduce some new dimensions. For example, I think section 68 and 69, you have introduction of new licenses or new types of companies and opportunities for a different type of player to come into the market. And I think also, it's in section 164, where you now have renewable energy obligations by DISCOs and GENCOs. and also opens up the door for state markets, right, in conjunction with the constitutional amendment. So these are interesting developments, and when we advise our clients, we try and situate their requirements or mandates first from the macroeconomics and regulatory perspective. That's a given for us. You must situate all engagements in that, and therefore you identify what the impact of that legislation is to their business, and you provide mitigations. In addition, where some of those new license regimes exist, we are also developing business models which they can optimize and deliver services to the sector and to Nigerians. In some instances where there has been some friction between the state and the federal, because the act is a federal act, there's also the state's legislations. And some of those legislations, or some aspects, are affecting how the current market participants will operate. So for example, you would have to, if you're a disco, you now have to create a holdco and a subco. So if a state has set up its own electricity market, what it means is that take maybe Enugu disco, and Enugu has created its own state market. It means that significantly the Electricity Act, to some extent, to a large extent, does not bind the state. So the disco has to create its own subsidiary and it gets its own license from that state. But other aspects of the act, for instance, the very first time it's been explicit that there can be increased PPPs, particularly in transmission. Transmission is still a bottleneck. And one of the things that it has done is created what they call the NISO, the Nigerian Independent System Operator. That was the board was just inaugurated last week. And part of what we're seeing is those entities, we're supporting them in as they get created, as they get as they take off, in order that they can help catalyze investments, particularly into the transmission grids. With the state markets, it means that if there's a bottleneck between Ekpe and Akongba, Koko, or somewhere, or Agigi, you can build just your own transmission line. You don't have to go to Abuja for that. But even if you do across states, you cannot do it on a private basis. So the act should create new opportunities, but it usually takes time to test the legislation with an investment. Like I said, we don't have time. We don't have time because every hour, every second, there are inefficiencies from lack of power, quality of power, and there's a cost to it, right? In fact, I have a view that if we have 24/7 power, traffic gridlock in Lagos will reduce, right? We have 24/7 power. You would see a situation whereby there's more transparency and turnaround time in what we are doing, right? Because the power will power your internet. You can Zoom and do anything you want to do online. Power will power your air conditioner. You can sleep in peace and wake up not feeling cranky, right? It will improve the human index and just make us better human beings. So we don't have time to become better human beings. We don't have time to be able to be more productive. We don't have, we don't want to waste a lot of time in traffic. So I think what should happen is, and again, the entity with the greatest ability to do greatest good for the greatest number is the government. I don't always like turning to the government for things, particularly in the power sector that has been privatized. But we live we're in a fiscal environment where certain macroeconomics and certain fiscal elements, certain policies drive most things. And so one of the things that will be useful will be genuinely having, maybe, how will I put it, taking certain situations and immediately piloting them. So some of the challenge has been, because it's a complex country, you roll out these things across the country. Whereas, one thing I learned from my time schooling in the UK is it's not equal treatment. Sometimes it's equal outcomes, right? So the way you will treat a certain situation in certain parts of the power chain or in certain locations, is not the same way you treat it everywhere else, right? So if they took certain parts of Nigeria and say, okay, this part of Nigeria, we're going to test run all parts of the reforms that are in the act, right? Be it tariffs, be it PPPs, whatever it is, and say, okay, we're going to run it in this particular area, and then use that immediately to see results. And therefore, as those results come through, you can now roll it out in other parts of the country, because it's a very complex country. And I always say, and this is what's happening now, the regulator takes decisions almost feeder by feeder. What I mean, if you're on a certain line or transformer in this area, the regulator now has that level of granularity to say, okay, how do we make an investment in that feeder line, right? So I think more of those sort of granularity, piloting, will help to one, because there are a lot of naysayers, there are a lot of people who doubt, there are a lot of people who are skeptical, there are a lot of people who are a bit on the fence, and for various reasons. There's been a trust deficit, between people, customers, those in the market operators across the value chain, discos, gencos, government. So there needs to be a place where we say, let's truth reign in this particular thing, irrespective of whose interest, is affected. And what we do is we run these models in our organization, in our office. And so we can run a certain model, build out the documentation, and then see it play out. And I think there's been a recent move by I think the UK government, trying to do that. I think they're starting in June, where they're looking at certain things, healthcare. Okay, how do we even get all the hospitals energized? You can't go to a hospital and say there's no power to operate on, right? Or you should contribute to buy diesel, right? So I think there's some of that effort around electrification of healthcare. The other day, I studied in UI and UCH. People were on strike or something, but there was a protest because UCH didn't have power for months and weeks, right? That's the premier teaching hospital in, I think, West Africa, right? They didn't have power. So if you take certain sectors, certain localities, and begin to implement some of these reforms, bit by bit, I think we can start now. We'll begin to see the light at the end of the tunnel.
At the end of the tunnel, how long will it take us to get to the end of the tunnel?
In your house, it can be very quick.
Okay.
Buy solar, right? Work with the disco. This might sound funny, but I think that if we form constructive engagements with the discos, which is, Mr. Disco, we are here to come and learn. Tell us the challenges, right? Create a forum where we can speak freely. Like I said, uncertainty is a problem. If I know that I won't have power today, I will make arrangements, right? If I won't have tomorrow, and if I don't have, why? When will it be fixed, right? If I'm on band A and I'm getting certain hours of power, if I'm not getting it, let's know why, So I think that individually you can take your certain steps, like I said, solarize, engage with the disco, work with them. There's even a regulation that says investment in electricity networks of 2017 that says you and me can contribute money and invest in the network to make it better. And in return, there are certain discounts and benefits you get from the disco, right? So there are things in place today that you can work with different stakeholders, and market operators, to achieve things at the micro level, right? And then at the macro level, I think steps are being taken. It's difficult for us to give a timeline, but we continue to support the sector, support the stakeholders, and we're convinced that year on year we shall make progress.
Hopefully. And at the end of the tunnel, there will be light.
Yes, very soon.
Thank you very much, sir. And if you're just joining us, we've been having a conversation with Mr. Erabor Okogun. He's the head of Energy Infrastructure Deal Advisory, KPMG. We've heard about the volatilities, the risks, and factors that can mitigate the risks in the electricity market in Nigeria. We've had a really interesting and insightful time. So please do well to watch this video, share it, and share your thoughts in the comment section. Thank you very much. Thanks again, sir.
Thank you so much.
My last question.
Yes.
And the answer is in one word.
Okay.
Describe the Electricity Act 2023 in one word.
Work in progress.
That's 3 words. But I'll take
dash,
it.
Dash, dash, dash. Work in progress.
All right. Thank you very much,
You're
sir.
welcome.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Appreciate the time. And I look forward to more of such programs. Look forward to seeing who's coming on next.
Yes, we'll definitely call you back because there's a lot we need to learn.
Sure. I'm available. Never far away.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks again.
You're welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, I remain your host, Ayomide Bello. See you on the next episode.
Hello everyone, welcome to the special edition of Let There Be Light Fireside Chat. As we all know, the electricity sector has evolved with the emergence of the Electricity Act 2023. Different states have been given regulatory control over their electricity market. So, in this special edition, we'll be spotlighting commissioners, coordinators of different states and having interviews with them on how they have been driving these changes. So, you do not want to miss any of the sessions. It promises to be enlightening, so stay tuned.